Welcome to Children's Hope Alliance. As I said, my name is Lauren Staley and I'm the Director of Residential Treatment, which means that I am over the treatment of all of the buildings that we have here, and I supervise all of the unit supervisors who are over the buildings themselves. The way that the structure works here is that of each of the cottages we have a unit supervisor who is overseeing everything that goes on within those cottages, and then we have CYCWs, which stands for Child Youth Care Worker, and those are the direct care staff that work with our kids. They would be much like a house parent, however they are the ones leading their treatment from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed. So those staff are vital to our treatment. As you're working in the cottages, what I would ask you to do is to respect that role and to respect their authority. So if the staff is saying like, hey, that's not a good idea for you to do that, then please listen. And these staff are young. Some of them are straight out of high school, some of them are not straight out of high school, straight out of college. But they're very young, so you might be like, what? Why is this kid telling me what to do? But they know their job, they know the expectations, so please respect their authority, and if you have any questions, go to them. Or if a kid says like, hey, can I use those scissors? Please ask the staff first, because that kid might have a problem with self-harm, and you don't want to be handing them a pair of scissors. So if you have any concerns, questions, please ask the CYCW, and if you have any questions beyond that, you can contact the unit supervisor of each cottage or myself. When you're working in those cottages, I will introduce you guys to the unit supervisor so they can be a point of contact for you when you are working in that cottage. What we're going to go over today for your learning objectives is our campus. I'm going to go over the level of treatments that we have on campus. Going to go over the program overview just to kind of give you an overview of what our treatment is like and what the expectations are. I will also go into the children served, types of trauma. We'll talk about complex trauma and the behaviors that are exhibited as a result of that complex trauma. Then we will go into boundaries and why they are important on this campus. We'll talk about the physical, verbal, and emotional boundaries and recognizing those boundaries. Next, we will go into behavioral support, how you can support these kids in their treatment as you're working with them as volunteers, and making sure that you're providing safety to them as you're on campus. The environment is crucial to these kids, so if the environment is changing, then they're going to change, their behaviors are going to change, their actions are going to change, so it's very important that we keep them safe. And we'll also touch on handling crisis. Hopefully you won't have to handle a crisis when you're working with these kids, but you never know. So the staff are definitely trained to handle crises, so definitely utilize them if you do run into an issue, but I'll also help you to work through how to handle a crisis and how your behaviors can help the kids work through that. Last, we'll go over HIPAA and confidentiality, which basically means what happens here stays here. You don't talk about these kids outside of here. You don't tell your friends things that happened. You don't go around to the neighborhood saying like, let me tell you what happened while I was working with these kids. We need to protect their confidentiality. Any questions about the overview of what we're going to discuss today?
Well, that's confidentiality, period. That you're not talking about no names kind of deal.
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, if you have a kid that, you know, says something really nice to you and you have like a really good connection with them and you want to tell someone about it, you know, please do, but don't use the name. And, you know, I would even suggest not even saying like, hey, I'm working with these kids at Children's Hope Alliance and they're sexualized or they've done this, done that. You don't want to go into their history of like things that they've gone through. But if you want to be like, hey, I worked with this kid and they did this really nice thing and it was awesome, then that's fine. Just make sure you're keeping it very, you know, objective and you're not using names.
Yes. Because I have to write like journals and papers and
Sure.
stuff about the experience that I'm doing here, as long as I'm not using names.
You can do that.
The only person that's going to see it is my professor.
Yes,
So.
and I'm sure that your professor knows all about confidentiality as well, and that they would not be using that for their own reasons behind that. But definitely if you want to write about it, you can. Just don't use names, or you can change names and try not to give too much personal history from the children, because you don't want somebody to read it one day and be like, I know exactly who they're talking about,
Yeah.
because that's just problematic to the kids.
Right.
So the mission on this campus, our mission is to provide a safe, healing journey for hurting children and families, creating hope now and in the future. What do you think that means, and why do you think that would be our mission?
Because that's what they need.
Exactly, that is what they need.
An environment that they feel comfortable in. They've all been through some sort of trauma that they need to, recover's the wrong word, but let me guess the right word, I don't know.
Cope, exactly. Cope is a good word for it. Because many of these kids, the trauma that they have experienced, they will struggle with their entire lives. And it is something that they're just going to have to cope with. They're not going to ever just like get over it all. So definitely coping is one thing that they need to do and learn to do. Anybody else have any feedback on why this is our mission, why it's important?
Just because you guys focus more on helping them not only overcome the struggles that they face, but to help them in their future as far as teaching them how to live and how to handle life situations once they leave here, which is different than a lot of places.
Certainly. Yeah, because a lot of these kids come in here and they don't have a family. They don't have anybody to go home to. So when they leave our treatment facility, if they are close to the age of 18, then they might go into an independent living program, which means that they would be on their own. So certainly with the kids that are in our level 3 building, which I'll go into what that means, we're preparing them to go back into the community. We're preparing them to go back and live a normal life per se, because here clearly is not a normal life. They're kind of living in a bubble here. If you haven't noticed, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they're here 24/7. They go to school here, they live here, so this is not at all what the outside world, as we say, would be. So we have to teach them how to go out into the future and be able to cope and move on with their lives. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, to me, the two words that is hope, and to me the most important word is future. To know that yes, you do have a future that's going to be beyond and better than what you've been. I'm going to go ahead and say the crap you've been dealt
Certainly.
in life thus far. So
Yeah, and I think that, I like that our mission statement includes a large piece of what our name is, Children's Hope Alliance, because that's all what we're all about, is providing hope to these kids. All right, going into the levels of treatment, because you'll hear me say PRTF a lot, and what that means is Psychiatric Residential Treatment Facility. So if I say PRTF, it just rolls off the tongue better than saying all of those 4 words. So I'll say that a lot, but that's what I'm referring to. It is our psychiatric residential treatment facilities that our kids are in. We have 1 locked PRTF and we have 1 unlocked PRTF. The locked PRTF is going to be our kids that have the most behaviors, in a sense. They might have run risk. They might have a great deal of sexual abuse, where they might have been sex trafficked, so they might have a lot of sexualized behaviors. They might also be engaging in a lot of self-harm. So in this building, they're locked and they're under supervision 24 hours a day. We have staff that work in there from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and then staff that work from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. We also have a nursing supervisor that has an office within that building. So they're available 24 hours a day as well, our nurses on campus, to help with the psychiatric meds and any kind of thing that they need to work with, especially if we have to do a restraint. So we have those nurses available. Also, what you might see in that building is a lot of aggression. The kids that are in that building may show a lot of outward behaviors because of their trauma, but that locked building is what keeps them safe and stabilized. So our hope with the locked building is that if a kid comes into that building, we can stabilize them from 30 to 90 days, and then we can step them down on our campus, or we can step them down to a treatment facility that's going to better meet their needs. But the hope in that building is to get them stabilized enough where they're not going to run, they're not self-harming as much as they were when they came in, they're not being as aggressive, and they're better able to take care of themselves. So they're able to start coping better. And what we do with that is having the staff help them cope at first. So we're not hoping that they can help themselves as much as getting staff to help them, and then they can use their coping skills. And what we call that is co-regulation, which means that staff have to help them to cope. So that's what we're expecting from the kids in our locked PRTF. Yes, Steve?
How are you getting the residents?
We may get some kids to the locked unit that come from jail, detention. We might have them coming from a lower level of care, such as an unlocked PRTF or a level 3 that didn't work out for them, so they had to be put in a higher level of care. Some of those kids were taken after being in sex trafficking and then gotten by the police and then brought to our facility for care. We might also have some of those kids that have run away from home and have been gone for weeks, and then they bring them to our facility because they continue to be a run risk at their own home. So we get them from a lot of different areas.
But from the state?
Yeah,
So
all of our
at least
kids-
are crisis centers or hospitals or,
well, all of our kids are Medicaid funded. So they are overseen by MCOs, which means Managed Care Organization. So the MCOs get with us and make referrals. So if a child is in a lower level of care and they see that it's not working, then they might make a referral to us for a higher level of care. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where our kids come from. And sometimes we get kids in our level 3 building that should have been in the locked building. And just to give you an example of that, we had a kid once come in our level 3 a few months ago, and this kid had a lot of suicidal ideations, which means that they thought about suicide a lot. So this kid was trying to run into the road and jump in front of cars to hurt themselves. They were engaging in a great deal of self-harm. So clearly the level 3 was not a high level of care enough for this child to keep them safe. So at that point, we made an emergency admission to our locked unit. So that child was able to stabilize in our locked unit, cut down on the run risk because they're locked in the unit, so they can't run. They also in the locked unit don't have access to anything that could hurt themselves. They use bendy pencils, which means they use a rubber pencil. They don't use pens. They don't use mechanical pencils, anything like that. They use crayons and bendy pencils, so that cuts down a lot of the things that they could use for self-harm. So we're keeping them as safe as we can in that locked building until we can step them back down. That same child that was running into the road was in our locked building for 30 to 60 days and has recently stepped down to our unlocked PRTF because she was able to maintain safe behaviors and use her coping skills. Our unlocked PRTF is called Hickory. In our unlocked PRTF, the behaviors might still be somewhat elevated, but they're not going to be as big of a risk as what our Campbell locked PRTF would be. So in our Hickory PRTF, we might still see some run risk, but they're able to be brought back in, or they're able to run out of the cottage and then bring themselves back in. So it's not something that is a risk to harm themselves. We might also see some self-harm behaviors in Hickory, but it's going to be very superficial. And what I mean by that is they may scratch themselves, but it doesn't require medical attention. So they might still be engaging in the self-harm, but it's not to the extent that they require medical attention. Also in our unlocked PRTF, you'll also see some kids that don't know how to regulate their emotions and are still going to require that co-regulation from our staff. So they're still going to require the help of staff to help them to work through their issues or work through their blow-ups. But what we want to see by the time that they step down from our Hickory PRTF is that they're able to self-regulate or help themselves work through issues. At that point, we hope that they can step down to our level 3 building. We currently have 2 level 3 buildings on our campus. One is a boys' cottage and one is a girls' cottage. Both of those cottages have 8 kids capacity each, which means that they can house 8 kids at a time. And those buildings have staff in them that live with the kids. So what I mean by that is that the staff come in. They come in for their shift at either 7 a.m. or 8:30 a.m., depending on if it's a transition day or not. But they come in and they stay with the kids for 4 days and they sleep in the cottage. So what we're hoping for at that point is the kids are stabilized enough and have enough self-regulation that they're able to handle that they're able to go to sleep and sleep all night throughout the night, that they're able to get up when the staff asks them to get up the next morning. But those staff are sleeping in the building with those kids for 4 days, then they're off for 3 days, then they come back on and work for 3 days, and then they're off for 4 days. So that's the rotation that they work: 4 on, 3 off, 3 on, 4 off. They do sleep in the cottage, and we have security that watch the cameras throughout the night to make sure that there's no issues. If there is issues, then they will call the staff and have the staff wake up and check on the kids. And then once everything's settled, then the staff can go back to sleep.
Excuse me.
Sure.
The locked cottage, or where there, I guess, the most issues and the most trauma, are they in rooms by themselves? You don't
They
put
are.
them in a room with some.
No, they all have their own bedroom and their own bathroom. The doors do not lock or shut because that could be a risk in itself, and having a kid lock themselves in their room. So they have swinging doors. So they do still have their privacy, but it's a swinging door. And they also do not have shower curtains, shower rods, anything like that. So in their shower, it's just kind of like an open shower. Because we've had issues, of course, with shower rods or shower curtains. So they also have that stipulation to help keep them safe.
Does it traumatize them even more sometimes if they've been brought in let's say at the beginning of a staff member's 4-day shift,
Sure.
and they kind of bond or whatever with that person, and then that staff member, they're rotated out from it. Does that bother them a lot, or is that something that kind of just slides?
I think that it bothers them probably when they're newer staff, just getting to know that staff, because a lot of our kids have trust issues and issues in building healthy relationships. But as far as them being traumatized by having someone coming in and out, I think that they get used to it because they're used to the schedule and they know how it works. And especially once the staff has, been here a while, then they're expecting it. They know it. They're like, oh, I know Miss So-and-so is coming in tomorrow. So they get used to the schedule. What is really important with these kids, and I'll go into a great deal more later, is consistency. The consistency is so important to them because they have had people come in and out of their lives so much throughout their lives. So that's why it's so important to help build healthy boundaries and to model healthy boundaries for these kids. Because I know that you mentioned working with your wife, and that's something that she had asked me in her volunteer training is, could my husband and I come in and work? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be great to model a healthy relationship for these kids, because that's not something that they've been exposed to. In our level 3 buildings, so those kids, have less of the self-harm going on. They'll have less of the run behaviors. They'll have less of the, boundary concerns. And hopefully to that point, they're able to self-regulate and use their coping skills themselves, again, to prepare to go back out into the community, because that's our hope. Also in our level 3 buildings, they will go on outings. So we try to get them exposed to the community in that way, in going maybe out to eat or doing community activities. We also have a couple that comes in and does gardening with them in the summertime and cooks with them, so teaching them some life skills. So that's why, having volunteers come in and cook with these kids is such a great idea, because for one thing, the kids love to eat. They love to eat good food, and they love to just learn how to do things, because that's not something that their family has done for them. So I think that's certainly that they enjoyed doing. And also just seeing that someone cares in coming in and spending time with them. So any other questions about our levels of care?
Are they, obviously the people that come into that have major trauma and psychiatric issues, but are the kids generally, I want to say, happy to be someplace that they think might be good, but do they resist coming here?
They do. Not all of them. Some of them, are happy to have a place to be, a roof over their head. But for the most part, we do have some kids coming in with a lot of resistance. They either don't understand why they're here, don't understand why they need treatment, don't feel like they need to be away from their family. If they have a family, many of them have come from a place where they might have been living with like a boyfriend and being able to do whatever they want all day long, not going to school. So, of course, they're resistant to that because they're like, now I have rules. What is this? But certainly we try to work through that, and a lot of it has to do with their trust and their, poor boundaries and poor relationships. They just don't know how to form that. So when they come into a place that's strange, then they're obviously going to be resistant because it's new to them. But once they get to trust staff and get to know that the staff are here for them and we are here to help, then of course they grow into it and are less resistant to the treatment. And just to focus on your question about where these kids come from, we'll also have kids coming to our level 3 building from the outside. They may be coming from a different level of care. Sometimes we'll have kids that have been in intensive in-home treatment and it didn't work for them, or they were in outpatient treatment and it didn't work for them, so they have asked to be put in a higher level of care, and that's what our level 3 building would be. So our hope after that is if we can get our kids stabilized and get them to a point where they're able to self-regulate and are doing well and being safe in the community, then we hope to either step them down again to a level 2, a level 1, or a PRTF, or not a PRTF, independent living program, or they might even go home. If they have a family and their family is stable, then they might even go home and have intensive in-home treatment or go home with outpatient treatment. Any other questions about that?
What are
Yes.
the ages that you guys have here? Because I know, so you have one, like the level 3, you have one for girls, one for boys.
Right.
Or you have one that I'm guessing has quite a large age gap?
We do. We serve ages 12 to 17. So anywhere between that, I think right now in our level 3 building girls, we have anywhere from 12 to 16. In our boys right now, we have anywhere from 12 to 17. So that's what we have in all of our buildings, is just a mix between those ages, because we can't really keep it with, the same kids, the same age in the same building, because there's just such a variety of different behaviors. Because the 12-year-old could have more coping skills than the 17-year-old, but they might be acting the same. So, it's hard to kind of distribute them the way that they should be. And even our school, runs into an issue of that, and having like different ages in the class, because the 12-year-old's like, why am I in a class with a 17-year-old? And 17-year-old's like, I'm in a class with a baby, why? But, so.
Right.
But in general, they tend to get along, because they all understand that they have come from a similar background, especially when they start working through their trauma work. They're like, wow, we have more in common than I thought. We've been through the same stuff. So it kind of works out that way. Any other questions about levels of treatment? And you guys, I know that your wife has just recently started working in the Campbell Cottage, the Lock Cottage, and I don't want you guys to be afraid of Campbell Cottage. I mean, certainly it's the higher level of behaviors. However, right now it's really the calmest building that we have on campus. So they're really great to work with too. The kids in Campbell Cottage really love like art projects, music, creative things, and you have to be creative to work with these kids, because you can't give them anything that they could use to self-harm, and you have to be really careful about cooking with them, because you can't use a knife. A lot of them can't use a fork, so it's like, the kids in...
So we won't be teaching knife skills classes.
No, not in Campbell. And really, it's going to be difficult to do that in most of the cottages, especially the ones that have a lot of self-harm. But, I mean, a lot of it's just about supervision and role modeling, so...
Do y'all have self-harm in even like the level 3 cottages?
We do. Yeah, there is still some self-harm going on in the level 3, but it is going to be less severe than it would be in the Campbell Cottage, because if they do get to that point, no, and if it did get to the point where it was life-threatening, then of course we would consider the option of putting them in Campbell if they weren't able to control themselves.
And now as far as because I know a lot of people see the self-harm in very different ways, but do you guys see it as if they are actually taking a razor and cutting themselves, as long as they're not like cutting deep or trying to actually harm themselves enough to, seek medical attention? Or could they still be in like level 3?
They could, yeah. It's all going to be about, their self-control, because if they're able to do it and then they feel some guilt behind it and are able to continue their treatment to work on it, then yeah, sure, we're going to be like, okay, you deserve to stay in here because we see that you're trying. Right. But if they're, doing it every day and not complying with their treatment and nothing seems to be helping, then we're going to consider a higher level of care, because we have to put the safety of the kids first. The populations we served, we talked about this a little bit. We serve ages 12 to 17. All the children on our campus have they have gone through some sort of complex trauma. I know that all of you have been given a complex trauma article. I do suggest that you read that before working with our kids, because it will tell you a lot about complex trauma, what it is, and how it affects these kids, because it does affect them in pretty much every aspect of their life. These kids have also been sexually abused. We are a sexualized treatment facility, meaning that every kid here has been sexually abused. We also have some kids that have gone on to abuse others because of their sexual abuse. We do not have anyone on our campus who is a strict offender, meaning that they just offend kids and have never been sexually abused. All of our kids have had that sexual abuse background. But that being said, our kids have a lot of boundary issues, meaning that they might show some sexualized behaviors. Like if you simply lean down and touch your toes, then they might take that as something sexual. They are very heightened to sexual responses, so we do not touch these kids. We do not hug them. We do not rub our body parts against them, because they could become sexually aroused in doing that. And that is super, super duper important, because these kids may try to hug you, may try to touch you, but you really need to create your personal bubble. Like with them, a lot of them it's like hands length. We need to do this. And that's how far they're going to stay away from their peers, and that's how far they're going to stay away from us. So our kids have also experienced physical abuse, emotional abuse, and many of them have experienced maltreatment and neglect. I had a kid once that he was so maltreated and dirty, his parents never bathed him and things like that, that he even told me this to me, so I'm not at all making fun of him, but he said that he looked like Pigpen from Charlie Brown, is how dirty he was when they found him from DSS. And he also had club feet because his parents never bought him new shoes, and he had to constantly wear shoes that were too little for his feet. So that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with here. And you're going to see a lot of behaviors, like the kid might act out, but it's not you shouldn't take it personal, because these kids are just trying to protect themselves, and that's what they've done their entire life. So they act out at a hand's length to protect themselves. And due to the fact that these children may have experienced the combination of these things, it's called complex trauma. So again, please read the article on complex trauma. It will help you to better understand complex trauma and how it affects the kids that you're seeing. And it will also give you a good idea as far as the symptoms you might see as a result of their complex trauma. Complex trauma can affect children in a multiple amount of ways. It affects their attachments and relationships. It affects their physical health, as in their body and their brain. And what I mean by that is that it changes their brain chemistry. A scientist once did a study on the brain and complex trauma, and he took a picture or a brain scan of a healthy or non-traumatized 3-year-old, and then took a brain scan of a traumatized 3-year-old, and the differences were severe. The brain of the traumatized 3-year-old was much smaller. It might have been like this, and you could see the different chemicals in the brain and how they had been affected. And the kid that was normal or untraumatized was much larger and just looked much healthier and had less damaging parts of the brain. So it can affect their brain. It also affects the regulation. So they might be quick to get angry, quick to get upset, quick to throw things and cuss and scream and all that. They also might have dissociation. Does anyone know what dissociation is? Because that's a hard one. Dissociation is when the kid might have an out-of-body experience.
Like NPD?
Explain that a little bit.
Multiple personality?
Oh, it could be like that. It could be like that. Some of our kids do have multiple personality tendencies, but dissociation can also happen with PTSD. So if they're in a moment where they get triggered, then they might look like they're in a zone or look like they're out of it. But what they're doing is protecting themselves because they've been triggered, so they're trying to remove themselves from the situation. They may have behavioral regulation issues, which are much like you can imagine. This is going to be like conduct disorder and things like that, where the kid is acting out or cussing all the time or throwing things or becoming aggressive. It also affects their cognition, such as their thinking and learning, and also affects their self-concept and future orientation. A great deal of our kids have issues with self-esteem and self-respect. They don't have a good self-concept because they haven't formed healthy relationships in their life, so they really don't even know who they are as a person. So a lot of times we spend a great deal of time just helping this person find an identity and figure something out, because some of their identities could have been the drug group they were a part of, or the gang that they were a part of, or being in sex trafficking. That was their identity, and that's a scary place to be. We try to help them to find a healthy self-concept. So we have a staff member here. I'm going to ask her to come up because this is a good time for her to talk about some of these areas of complex trauma and how they affect kids. So moving into behaviors exhibited. This is Olivia. Olivia used to work in our Campbell cottage, which is our locked unit. How long did you work there?
I was in Campbell for maybe about 1.5 years, but I worked in the cottages for 2.5 years.
And she has since moved to our admissions department, so now she works in admissions. So she helps to get the kids into the buildings now. But I wanted her to tell you a little bit about the behaviors that you might see in the cottage and how to best work with these kids and not take things so personally. So, behaviors exhibited. Sexualized behavior.
Yes, sexualized behavior. So this could be inappropriate dancing. It could be, like randomly a kid will break out on a really inappropriate song and start dancing, which is not allowed in most of our cottages. So that's kind of one of the things. If they're doing it, we don't encourage it, and we actually will prompt them to stop. Another thing that could be sexualized behavior for them that would not necessarily seem inappropriate in an outside setting would be coming up and doing this. Because we have very strict boundaries. They have had inappropriate sexual relationships and have been touched by other people in inappropriate ways. So we want to make sure that we're not putting them in a position to be re-traumatized, and that we're also showing them that we can be supportive and caring in a non-physical way. So most of the time we don't allow hugs. If a child would like a hug, they can ask for a side hug, and that's, I'll just let you know, side hug, no front to front, one arm. And for them, that's really important because they might try and make connections with people through using their bodies, and we don't want to allow that because it's an unhealthy behavior they've had in the past.
Certainly. Steve?
So, if you're in a situation with a volunteer, and I can't think of one, but then someone comes up and tries to hug
you.
do you like, back away?
Well, what you would say at that point, and what we say is like, hey, that, I'm not really comfortable with that. This is my bubble. This is my personal space, and this is your personal space.
I would say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just don't.
And they-
I don't
and they
think
know
it's
that.
something that's-
Yeah.
That has the wrong effect. Of like,
Certainly.
"Oh, I'm not touching you."
Yeah, and I get what you're saying, not wanting to hurt their feelings. However, from the moment that they're brought into this place, they are told about boundaries. Boundaries are explained to them as an expectation from the beginning. So they're going to try to manipulate that situation because they know that you don't know that expectation, or at least they think you don't know that expectation. So they're going to try to do it.
As long as they know that, so you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we literally talk about that every single day with them. We have to remind them, hey, let's respect personal space, boundaries. So if they're coming up and trying to full frontal hug you, they know that's against expectations.
Yeah.
So it won't be a surprise for them for you to say, hey, like, let's take a step back. My personal space is this, and I'm not comfortable with that right now.
Yeah. Definitely. And even if you want to,
You can even
throw it off on staff, saying like, staff told me that that's not an expectation, so I want to make sure that I'm following the rules. So at least then you're teaching an appropriate, role modeling good boundaries and good rule following, because these kids don't always like to follow the rules. So.
As a father of four who monitored some high school dances, I can tell you that 95% of the regular population has sexualized.
I know.
dancing.
I know. It's very disturbing. It's very disturbing these days, because it's even surprising to me. And I've been in this field for 8 years, that these kids at 14 know more about sex than I know at 30. So it's like,
it's not been long since I've been out of high school, and I'm sitting here thinking of all this stuff happened in my high school, like inappropriate. I mean, there used to be crazy amounts of things that were inappropriate, and back then we were like, why are you telling us we're not allowed to hug in the hallway?
Yeah.
We're not allowed to kiss in the hallway. It's like, why? But now I understand it. Now I'm, older, and I understand. But
yeah, and also one thing to keep in mind with the boundaries and the sexualized behavior is that these kids, especially with their history of sexual abuse, the touch could have led to something different in their past. So you don't want to, even come up and like rub them on the back, because that could have been something that led to sexual abuse in their past. And what I mean by that is someone could have, come up and rubbed them and then started rubbing them in other places.
Right.
And led to sexual abuse. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So-
grooming is a word that we throw around a lot.
Yeah. An example of what could be appropriate touch would be if they did something good, and you can be like, oh, hey, good job. A lot of what we do is a fist bump.
Yep.
So, good
Yep.
job.
or the
Well, yeah, you can do that.
You can do high fives, but also just going back to sexualized behavior, a lot of these kids have an issue with masturbation. Just throwing that out there. So you might not want to do high fives because you don't know where that's
I'm
from.
not like you see some people on tennis courts, even when they miss shots, I'm
Yeah.
not a high fiver
Yeah.
person, but
Yeah, so we do fist bumps because that's safer and it's less touch and it's, yeah.
it was the cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good way you could redirect if they ask for a side hug. So, hey, let's get a fist bump.
Yep.
Step back.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And that happens. It's like, hey, I'm not comfortable with hugs. How about we just do a fist bump for now until we get to know each other better? And then you might come up with a new handshake for each other, like where you do a fist bump and then a pow. So, you just come up with fun and cool and interesting things so they're avoiding that hug thing.
Yeah.
The next behavior that might be exhibited is inappropriate attachments and unhealthy relationships. So I touched on this a little bit a minute ago, that these kids do not know what healthy relationships are. What they might consider a healthy relationship is their boyfriend beating them and then having sex with them and everything was okay. So they do not know what healthy relationships are, even from their parental standpoint, because like I said before, they might have been maltreated, they might have been abused by their parent, they might have seen domestic violence in their home, so they don't have a good idea of what a healthy relationship is. So we teach that a lot on this campus, and that's why I like for volunteers to come in and know what this means so they can model good and healthy relationships with our kids.
So what I observed in my few years in the cottages is that a lot of their unhealthy relationships kind of shows itself in them trying desperately to seek an attachment. And so they might try and tell you that they love you a lot, like, oh, I love you so much. We don't return that by saying, I love you too. You could say like, oh, well, you know, that's sweet. I appreciate spending time with you. But we don't tell the kids we love them because really we don't know them and we're not in a position to love them. That can really confuse them, saying like, oh, I just love you so much. Another thing they might try to do is go in detail about their trauma or their abuse with you. And that would be them trying to form an unhealthy relationship, and really is something they should talk about with their therapist. So if they ever make you feel uncomfortable and they start talking about that, the best thing to do is to say, you know, I really don't feel comfortable. I'm sorry that happened, but I think you should talk about that with your therapist or your staff.
The next behavior that you might see is verbal and physical aggression. Again, I kind of pointed on this when talking about the locked building, Campbell, but some of our kids, even in our level 3, show physical aggression and verbal aggression. And that might be something that you see when you first meet the kid, because again, they don't have, you know, a good idea of a healthy relationship and they don't trust you yet. So when you walk in the building and you introduce yourself and you say, hey, my name is Steve. What is your name? They might be like, fuck you. That's what my name is. Figure it out for yourself.
Yes.
So, and I'm being completely honest when I say this, because you will hear these things, and I do not want you to take it personally, because these kids, for one thing, like to see reactions out of people. For another thing, they want to see if they push you away, will you still stay? And another thing is they just don't know those healthy relationships.
Right.
That might be how their parent talked to them. So, you know, you just don't know where they've picked this up from. So you might see physical and verbal aggression. Certainly, if you see any physical aggression, please get a staff and remove yourself from the situation, because you don't want to get involved in a physical altercation with these kids.
And with verbal aggression as well, I would add, because that can often lead to physical aggression. So if they start getting physically aggressive or verbally aggressive, just kind of take a step back. It would be okay to leave the situation, because the last thing that you want to do is try and defend what you were doing or defend yourself and then become even more escalated. Because when they're in that moment, what we're taught in training is that when you're at your angriest, you're literally at your stupidest. Your brain is not functioning. So they're not going to be able to talk to you and reason with you when they're mad. The best thing to do is not to engage and to let staff handle it.
Yep, certainly. And like I said before, please just try not to take these things personally. If it is something that starts to get to you, please come to myself. I will talk to you about it. I will try to help you with some self-care skills. But it's certainly not something that you can take personally, because these kids are, you know, have fought throughout their lives, and that's how they've protected themselves, is by pushing other people away and, you know, acting out. So last behavior that you might see, well, certainly not the last that you might see, but one that you might see is manipulation.
Yes, manipulation. Our kids love to manipulate the volunteers because they think, like we talked about earlier with the hugs, they can get away with things because the volunteers might not know the rules. So this could come in any kind of form. It could be by physically trying to press boundaries with conversations, pressing them, even things like, oh, hey, I really love Snickers. Can you bring me a Snickers next week? No. All of that stuff has to be cleared through the therapist or through the unit supervisor. So they will do whatever they can to try and get around the rules. And the best thing to do in that situation, I would think, is to just say, you know, let me check with your staff. Never agree to do anything for the kid unless you have checked with staff, because they know that they're not supposed to do things, but because they're in a pretty structured facility, they're not used to getting things like candy bars and stuff out of the ordinary. And they're going to try and get that from you because you're somebody new and they want to build a relationship with you and they think they can. So just be very aware of that. And there are situations where you can bring things in, but it would have to be approved and for the whole group.
Yeah.
If we have a mentor, sometimes mentors would bring birthday gifts, but that's, again, something that goes through staff and that we also go through on the self-harm issue. Many of our kids aren't allowed to have things that are breakable or sharp. So if they're asking you to bring them a mechanical pencil, no, they can't have a mechanical pencil, especially in Campbell, because it could be dangerous. So just always check with staff, always check with Lauren or a therapist as a unit supervisor.
Certainly, because these kids are very creative with the things that they use to self-harm as well. I know a girl that we currently have used a marker to self-harm. She broke it, so the plastic was sharp, and used it to self-harm. We've also had kids to steal the plasticware from the cafeteria and break it and use it to self-harm. So they're very creative. So please always check with staff before giving these kids something. Yes?
Do y'all make when they are experiencing self-harm, do you make them cut their nails and stuff?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I've actually clipped somebody's nails for them before over the trash can, so several times.
Yep, certainly.
And if a kid ever tells you that they are self-harming, please let staff know. We might already be aware, but if we're not, it's great for you to pass it on to us because they could be trying to form a relationship with you by letting you know, oh, please don't tell my staff, but I cut myself last night. We would need to know that.
Yeah, and certainly if a kid says, hey, I want to tell you something, but you can't tell anybody, red flag, red flag. So I would let them know right from the get-go, okay, you can tell me this, but I will have to relay that information to your
Cut
staff.
it off when you start hearing that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Say, I have to tell you something, but well, why don't you just talk to this?
Yep,
guy?"
Exactly.
that's what I would do. If I was a volunteer, I would cut it off right in the beginning and say, I appreciate that you want to talk to me. However, that might be something you talk to your staff about first, or pull a staff into the conversation and say, okay, you can tell me, but I want this staff to be here when you tell me. Because that's another thing that we have a real importance about is accountability. So you never want to be alone with one of these kids, definitely. The last thing that I want Olivia to touch on is the importance of boundaries. I know we talked about that a little bit, but I just want to be able that you understand why boundaries are so important.
Boundaries, it's not something that's easy to enforce. It doesn't come naturally to me to not hug people. Like Lauren
Right.
knows, I come to her office for a hug most mornings.
Yeah.
But with these kids, they're not used to having appropriate relationships. They're not used to having appropriate touch, and they will make allegations. So this is not to scare you, it's to help you protect yourself and also protect the kids from getting in a position where they're re-traumatized. Because if they start to feel too attached to you, it could be really upsetting when they go to a new placement, or if you can't come a week, that can cause a lot of stress for them. If you're giving them hugs and they might think there's something more to their relationship than there is. Let's see, what am I forgetting? What does a healthy relationship look like with these kids? It looks like greeting them when you see them. Hi, how are you? How are you doing? It was great to see you. All of the common pleasantries that you would use with other people, just taking a little bit of a step back in terms of the physical interaction. Like we talked about earlier, not using the phrase, I love you. But certainly using supportive things, such as if they tell you, hey, like I got a B on my test. That's great. I'm proud of you. Good job.
Certainly.
Giving them a lot of positive affirmation, but in a way that you would give it to anybody. Somebody that's a coworker or somebody that's in your family, but it could be applied to anybody across the board and not just somebody that you have a very close relationship with.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Is the boundaries issue primarily a product of sexual abuse?
It is a product of their complex trauma as a whole. So it could be from their physical abuse, it could be from their sexual abuse, it could be from their emotional abuse. Because a lot of these kids have some attachment-seeking behaviors, which would look like attention-seeking behaviors, where they are, acting out to get your attention, or maybe even engaging in self-harm to get attention. So what that is a result of is them not having healthy attachments in their life. So they're seeking that healthy attachment in a very inappropriate way.
So when do you, or maybe you don't because they're only here till they're 18 or so, but when do you start introducing that?
From the beginning.
No, I'm saying reintroducing, because I'm a person that believes, I'm not disputing this, and I agree with this totally, but I'm a person that believes that kids today in general do not get enough hugging and their parents telling them they love them, and you know what I mean?
Well, we certainly teach healthy and appropriate touching when we're in therapy or when they're in treatment groups for like healthy relationships. So like teaching them like what would be appropriate on a first date, or what would be appropriate when you're with someone for a month or whatever. So we teach them that through verbal teaching and through groups and things of that nature, but we're not going to do that because we at this point are a caregiver, and as a caregiver it's not within our realm to be hugging them and doing those kinds of things. But we certainly teach them that, hey, this is what a healthy adult might do, or this is what a healthy parent might do in your life. And when parents come up for the child CFT and want to give the kid a hug, then we don't condone that. We're like, we don't say that you can't do that. We say, hey, yeah, great, that's wonderful. I'm glad you're all showing like a healthy relationship. But as far as staff and caregivers, we don't do the touching.
So if my wife and I were doing something, cooking or something, is it appropriate for them to see me hug my wife, or should I avoid anything like that? I'm not that I'm gonna do
Right.
this. I'm just trying to understand
Yeah, I mean,
how that works.
if you guys are just working with them and just cooking, I mean, I don't know where a hug would come in. I mean, I'm just trying to think.
You don't know my wife.
Well, yeah, but I think that with these kids, it's just really important that sure you can model a healthy relationship with your partner with them, but you want to be really careful about that, because even with the hug, they might be like, "Ooh, I bet they're going to go upstairs and have sex." So you just want to be careful about that, because you don't know where they're going to take that.
And even though these kids have been sexually abused and maybe they've had a lot of experience in that type of way, or they've acted out sexually and prostituted themselves, their mindset towards sex is still very young. So we can have a 17-year-old in a cottage watching a PG-13 movie, and there will be a little peck, a kiss, and it's that reaction you would expect from a first grader, where they're like, oh, look at that. It's not, they can't really handle it appropriately. And that's why we keep it so limited, because to them, since they have been so traumatized, it's not as easy as it is for us.
Right.
So we can see a simple peck and be like, okay, that's cute, they love each other. They'll see it and they think, oh my gosh, that's so scandalous, they're gonna go do this and that and the other, oh, they like each other. It's not at all like it would be for someone who hasn't been traumatized.
Yeah, and this is a higher level of care than what like an outpatient treatment would be, like an outpatient therapist or like an intensive in home. So I would imagine that with intensive in home, yeah, when I did that kind of treatment, then I did teach like healthy touch in the family and things like that. But at this high level of care, they're just not there yet. Not for us to be teaching them those things, because we're just preparing them to go out into the community at this point. So we try to help them the best we can, but when we're stepping them down, we certainly, recommend that they continue working on their boundaries, or that they continue working on their healthy relationships outside of this environment.
And that happens at 18 in North Carolina, is that right? Or is it 21?
For
When they get the money runs out.
Oh, at 18. At 18, they can sign themselves out of treatment. Certainly, their parents can sign a petition to get guardianship, and they can continue treatment. But as far as the system goes, then yes, 18, they can sign themselves out of treatment.
But they still offer programs.
Yep, they still offer programs.
like
Yeah, because with the independent living, independent living.
And
Yeah.
there's also a CARS agreement with DSS for some kids who are doing really well. At 18, they can sign an agreement with DSS for them to still have custody of the child and to kind of provide assistance and that kind of thing. But that's not very common.
Real quick,
Sure.
back to where you said if we were to walk in and say, hi, I'm John L. Hagner or whatever, and you get the total smart aleck
Yeah.
appropriate
Yeah.
answer, do you say nothing or roll your eyes, or do you
Don't
say
roll your eyes.
No,
Oh,
don't
sorry.
worry.
I'll teach on that one.
No, don't worry.
or do you say, okay, excuse me, we're going to start over and we're going to try this one more time? Do we even go that far?
It's really going to be the staff's responsibility to kind of reprimand them for what they're saying. We're working with the staff to be, better at that. But I mean, it's going to be up to your comfort level and what you feel like. Because I want you to use your personality. Like, I don't want you to come in here and be fake with these kids, because they're going to read right through you. So it's certainly going to be on your comfort level. And if you feel the need to say, hey, that wasn't very nice.
Or, excuse me?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to try this one more time.
I-
I'm Jonelle. Your name is?
Right.
I kind of disagree with that a little bit.
Which one?
With just saying, excuse me.
Oh,
we're gonna
no, not
try
the excuse me.
again.
Because they're going to be, but and if you say excuse me, it's going to make them more mad.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I
Yeah.
would just,
Or say,
every time you, like, if you were to respond to them, keep it very undefensive. Just like, okay, well, maybe we can try that again later.
Yeah.
But definitely watch your tone of voice. That's a huge thing, because it is rude for them to do that, but they're not thinking about it that way. So
and they're going to know immediately if they've gotten to you.
Right.
and
Exactly.
and it's gonna amp them up. So
Yeah.
just kind of let it roll off. Okay, well, we'll try that again later, and then give attention to the ones who were appropriate. And
Yeah.
maybe then the child will want to come back later and interact with you in an appropriate way. But I would really keep away from anything confrontational with them that they would interpret as you being rude to them or getting mouthy with them, because then their response will probably be something like, what do you mean, excuse me? What? You mean you want to come here, lady? What? And they're going to
Yeah.
get in your face.
Yeah.
Like, you don't.
Right.
I would just. All right. Well, maybe we'll try later. Hey, Julie, how are you? Like,
Yeah.
just something different.
Yeah, and like it,
You guys are going to be, whenever we are introduced to a child, more than likely a staff.
there will be
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
There will be stuff.
There should
And-
not be a situation where you're alone with a kid.
No, you will never be alone
Like
with
if
the
you go
kids.
to a classroom and you're going to be tutoring or something,
Right.
the staff member's going to walk
There
over
will.
and be like, hey, this is
Right.
your tutor.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And
So then if they react, then the staff can take care of it.
Yeah.
You
Right.
don't even have to feel
And
like
it
that guy.
and it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about them trying to get a reaction out of you. Like many of them, that's what they're trying to do is get a reaction out of
Right.
you. And if that's what they get, then they're going to keep doing it. If they see that they've made you mad or that it upsets you, then they're going to. This is just going on the boundaries again. We've talked about all this: the fist bumps, the side hugs, the verbal boundaries, not saying "I love you," things like that. You also don't want to talk about a lot of personal things. I know that you said you have a history of self-harm, but you might not want to explicitly talk about that with the kids because a lot of times they will transfer their problems onto you, or they'll like. It's always easier to help someone else than it is to help yourself.
Yeah, and also keep in mind, this is something that's good to know about any of the kids on campus. If you share something with one kid, we don't ask them to keep secrets, so it's likely that they'll pass it on to their peers. So I'm sure that's something that y'all will talk about, but just being mindful that whatever you say to one will eventually get to everybody.
Right.
Right.
Right. We've sort of kind of touched on all of this, but how do you know what a child's boundaries are? Like when you're walking in the cottage and you're going to be working with these kids, how are you going to know what their boundaries are? What do you think?
Well, of course you're going to like you, like it says on the book. If they do react to you as in fuck you, I'm not talking,
Right.
then you take that as, obviously they have some issues with anger, and it's best to probably not approach things with them without another staff member until they trust you enough to have a relationship that's
Right.
not violent.
Definitely. What about body language? What might you see if a child has, unhealthy boundaries or trying to set up a wall? What might you see?
In a fetal position on a sofa or something that's just looks scared.
Definitely. Or like when Olivia was in here and hugged up on me, it's like if they're clearly coming and trying to give you a hug, they probably don't have the most healthy boundaries because you just met them, right? So again, just trying to reinforce your own boundary and setting up your own personal bubble. So how might you do that in working with these kids?
Well, one, I don't know, not so much, I guess, guys, it's probably not to do with one, dressing appropriately, not wearing something that they could be like, oh, hey,
Yeah.
or, definitely not hugging them, or
Right.
giving them the idea that you want to hug. And also, I guess just not giving off the persona of being, I guess, scared of them. It's not that you want to make them like, come at me, I don't care. But
Yeah.
not letting them think they can walk all over you. Not
Right.
giving them the body language that could, make them think that they can walk all over you.
Certainly. All right, what can you do to help? Obviously, you're coming here to help these kids. You want to make a difference in their lives. You want to be a part of their lives to show that you care. So what you can do to help is maintain appropriate boundaries with the kids, because that's what we teach here every day. Hold the children accountable for their actions. So much like we were talking about before, if they are, coming up and cussing at you, you don't want to kind of feed into that behavior. You want to hold them accountable for doing that. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that yourself, please get a staff, and the staff will hold them accountable for their behaviors. Because these kids, have spent most of their lives doing whatever they want to do, whenever they want to do it, and not knowing what a healthy, expectation is, or not really liking to follow expectations. But that's something that we teach here every single day. These kids are on a tight schedule. They get up at the same time every day. They eat breakfast at the same time every day. They eat lunch at the same time every day. They take their showers at the same time every day. So they do the same thing every day, every single day. So it's consistency. But we also want to hold them accountable for their behaviors, or they're not going to learn.
Should we report things like if someone verbally accosts you for no reason? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I would let the staff know. Because like I said, if you don't feel comfortable addressing it yourself, then the staff certainly need to do so.
Or like if there's a group, is it important for the staff to know, for you to say, you know, Sarah was like way distant in the back and
Yeah.
something's bothering her today.
Certainly.
So you want to tell
Yeah, and I think that it's going to be really important for you guys when you come in to check in with the staff and be like, hey, is there anything that I need to know today? Is there anything out of the ordinary that's happened? Just so they can give you a rundown of how things are going, so you're not, you know, triggering someone or, you know, calling on someone or making a joke to somebody that, you know, just had a very upsetting conversation with their mom or something. So just getting a rundown of how things are going. Before you come in. And once you get to know the kids, you'll be able to read them better. But certainly when you're first coming in, it would be a good idea to talk to staff and let them give you a kind of a summary of what's happening. Be aware of manipulations and know that this is a part of their past, not something that is vindictive. Like I said before, it's just something that's been a part of their past. It's how they've survived. Remember that these children have experienced tremendous trauma. They're strong, resilient, and vigilant. So these kids are amazing. I know that we say, you know, some negative things about them, like cussing at us or maybe being aggressive with us, but they're amazing kids. They're very intelligent. They're very creative. Some of the artwork that they do is amazing. So just, you know, just remember that they've gone through trauma, but you don't want to like baby them for that, because they're super strong, super resilient, super capable, and we want to make them feel that way. We want to build on their confidence, not being like, oh, poor thing, kind of thing, right? Any questions about what you can do to help?
Now, do y'all ever need like donations or anything as far as like how do the children get like their clothing and different things that they need just from for a day-to-day thing?
We have amazing donors. We even have some people that used to be at Grandfather Home when it was an orphanage 100 years ago that stick around and like donate things to us or give us grants for things. We also have something called the Grandparents Club, where many of those donors will donate money just for the clothing, so we can get money from those funds to buy the kids clothing. We buy clothing for them. We do summer shopping and then we do winter shopping, so they get, you know, both sides of what clothing that they need. The kids are here from anywhere from 8 months to a year. Some kids are only here for 4 months, depending on the severity of their case and what they're going home to. So they may not be here that long, but some of them come in with a lot of clothing, some of them don't, so we certainly will purchase that for them. Each of the cottages also have a budget to buy food, clothing, hygiene, and things like that, so they certainly can get all those things through the cottage itself, but we also have donations. Even at Christmas time, we have like the angel tree and then tons of volunteers that sponsor a child, so they will, you know, get that child's wish list and buy them everything on that list. We even have people who donate food at Christmas time, like an entire meal to us. And at Thanksgiving, we had the country club donate an entire, you know, spread of food for us. So we have a ton of great volunteers and donors that do purchase those things, but we also have the funds within our own agency to do so.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions about boundaries or holding the kids accountable? Do you have any questions about the things that you could do with the kids?
Well, I mean, I guess that comes in time, but I mean, what other activities? My wife thinks that we should go in there and like cook or whatever together, but what other things are acceptable or good?
They like anything artistic, so like painting or drawing, or they've even like painted birdhouses one time. During the fall, they carved pumpkins and, you know, decorated or painted pumpkins. They do love to cook. These kids love to cook. They love to crochet, things like that. And I even give the suggestions to volunteers to go in and say, like in your initial meetings, like what is something that you guys would just really like to do? Like what's a family tradition that you might have had, or, you know, something that you have always wished that you could do, or something that you wish you could learn to do, and getting a list of those things and then talking to staff about which ones would be appropriate and which ones would not. But they certainly are very creative. They love to do fun things. Like I said, we even had the group come in and do like gardening with the kids, so they helped create the entire garden. They even made scarecrows for the garden. We even had someone come in once and help with like a train set, like model trains, they helped them do that. So it's really in your comfort zone of what you like to do. So what are some things that you would like to do with the kids? Like, can you think of something that you might like?
To think of that.
Yeah.
Now, do y'all ever do, like, I know this is probably depending on the kids and how things are going, because I know she said, like, the girls group hasn't been able to go out and do anything in a while.
Right.
It's like they haven't earned it. They
Right.
haven't done the things that they need to do to earn it. Do y'all, like, on campus ever have, like, things in the yard that are all together with the kids? If they are, like, in
Oh,
level
yeah.
3 or-
In the summertime, level 3 cottages played softball against each other, the boys' cottage against the girls' cottage, and they loved it. They loved to play softball. In the summertime, we had a guy at the country club teach them tennis, so they had tennis lessons. Yeah. So they love being active and things of that nature. I know that some of them have also mentioned wanting to do like community service projects, which we certainly have to be careful about, just because, you know, it depends on where they're going and if they can run off and things like that. But we try to do lots of fun activities with them in the summertime. Sometimes they have even gone to, like, you know, Grandfather Mountain or, you know, Knights baseball games in Charlotte and things like that. So we try to get them out and about.
They can go places. You
They
got vans or
can.
something
They
like
can.
that.
We have vans. We have cottage vans. So we try to get them to go on outings as much as we possibly can, as long as they're maintaining safe behaviors. The boys' cottage tends to be the one that always gets to go because they're kind of chill or know how to follow expectations when they want to get something. But they even go to the movies, you know, go out to eat. Last night they went and got some food for the Super Bowl and watched the game. So, you know, they try to do fun stuff, even like bowling or skating, things like that.
No, I know, because we offer a lot of stuff on campus, that community stuff. So
Right.
do you guys ever take them to, like, stuff on campus, just to, I guess, kind of show them, oh, this is what college looks like?
Oh, like Appalachian is what you're referring to. We have not. We have not. We have gone to some Appalachian, like, basketball games, and some, like, Lees McRae sporting events, but we haven't taken them to, like, the college. If they're getting ready to leave our campus and they're, you know, at an age that they might be going to school and maybe joining our independent living program, then certainly we'll take them out to the community, help them go to job interviews, you know, take them to the colleges to see what they like, take them, you know, looking for apartments, to help them find an apartment. But if they're, you know, just still in high school and their plan is to go to, like, a level 2 treatment facility from here, then we really haven't done that. We might take them to a high school if they're going to a high school next, like if they're going to a level 2 and then going to a high school.
Well, I
then-
mean, like, we have, like movies on the lawn
Right.
and stuff like that. Not so much, like, a campus tour. But
Yeah, my worry with that would be the inappropriateness that they would see when they went.
This is a good point. This is a good point.
Because, yeah, sure, we have rules and expectations here about, like, clothing and how we act, but they...
This is a whole other
yeah, because I've seen how they dress.
Oh, yeah,
And it's like sometimes in bathing suits and, like, at a cold winter football game. So it's like, yeah. Because even taking them to the Knights baseball game, sometimes they're just like, some of the things they see, they're like, what? So.
No, I've been watching the football game. Now that I think about it, the football game is probably not a good option. I don't know why girls just think that, like, football games are, like, their place to dress, barely dress.
Yeah.
I guess is a better way to put it.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly we try. I mean, and like you mentioned before, like, when do you expose them to that stuff? So yeah, we try to do that, and when we get back, we'll, like, debrief it. Like, hey, I know you got really excited when you saw this or that or whatever, but maybe we need to talk about that and how that wasn't appropriate, or, you know, why that's a problem. So we certainly try to debrief it if we run into it on the outside environment, because we can't shield them from everything. Clearly.
Yeah, exactly. I can see where that would be a good thing, because they are going to see it. They are going to, you know, that's life. You can't shield them forever. So it is, I guess, once they get to that point,
Yeah.
to be able to start introducing bad behaviors that could happen and they might witness.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Another thing that kids really like, just to go back to your question about things that you can do, they really love coping skills, anything that can be a coping skill for them, such as essential oils or stress balls. I brought some examples here. This is some of the stress balls that we use, even this one here. Certainly it's something that couldn't be used for self-harm, so you want to be really careful and make sure that you don't get something that could be used for self-harm. So something really soft, silly, like this is just silly. We have essential oils that are made from just like coconut oil and essential oil that wouldn't be damaging to the skin, and they use these and maybe put it on a piece of cloth like this. So a lot of my kids will be like, I want some more smelly stuff on my cloth. So I'll put some like essential oil on the cloth, and they'll carry it around with them in their pocket. And if they feel stressed, then they might smell their lavender. If they feel upset, then they might smell their peppermint. So all of them are named different things. Like this one's named Deep Breathing. So of course that's for calming. Some of them are named like Confidence because they help build confidence. So I try to name them things that give them an idea of what it's going to help them with, rather than just saying, I'm putting lavender on this. I'd be like, I'm going to put lavender and chamomile because it is very good for calming you. So they know that that's the one they go to if they need to calm down. The last thing that I wanted to touch on, which is not on this slide, however, I think it is super duper important. Besides this, have fun with them because that's most important, is self-care. So I know that it's going to be sometimes difficult working with these kids. Like I said, especially in the beginning, they may, be resistant to working with you, or may have their, words of choice to use for you or at you. So please use self-care when working with these kids. When you go home, either de-stress or do whatever you need to do in order to be able to come back and be fresh and ready to go with these kids. So what do you guys do for self-care? I like to work out. I do yoga. I run with my dogs. I just, that's my coping skill, is to work out and cook. I love to cook. So what do you guys use for self-care?
Walking. I like to work out, but obviously not enough. But I'm working on that.
Well, that's good. That's
I'm working on
Well, you
that.
don't need to work on like I do.
Well, I'm working on I'd like to get into yoga. That's one
Yeah,
thing
definitely.
I'd like to do. It really depends on the day. I kind of go with whatever, goes with the flow. I drive a lot, and that ends up being kind of, because I have to drive back and forth. I'm doing to Winston like twice a week. So that ends up being kind of a calming thing, and just watching Netflix, which is awful. So not productive, but
Right.
it's calming to me. So
Yeah. Well, like I said, self-care is super important. If you do run into an issue where you're getting overwhelmed or you're getting stressed, please find me, find a therapist, something. I used to be a therapist on this campus. I was a therapist here for 2 years before I came into this role, so I still got my skills. So, but certainly have fun with the kids. They're still kids. We want them to be kids. Some of these guys come in here and they've been forced into adulthood. So they're like, I never had a childhood. I had it stolen from me. So how am I going to be a child now? We're like, you can still be a kid. Like, we want you to have fun. We want it to be, exciting and different for you. So another thing to do with these kids is like a team building activity. Like, that's something that we really love to do with these kids, where they're actually working together to accomplish something. So that might be something that you could do with them as well, is some sort of team building activity. And that might be something like a treasure hunt, or even like that activity where you blindfold someone and you lead them to an object without touching them, or things like that. So it's just different activities.
Issue, though, like interacting with girls and guys, like that.
We don't do the girls and guys.
Stuff with
Besides the softball thing, which sometimes turned into an issue itself, but we do try to keep them separate, because otherwise you're going to have to watch out for sexualized behaviors, them passing notes, things of that nature. Because sure, they go to school together, but when they're at the school together, they're forming relationships and falling in love with each other, passing notes, passing their personal information, and things like that. So you have to be really careful about them working together.
And how are they allowed to have technology like in the cottages? Like, do they have computers?
They do not. They have iPads at school, but they do not have the technology at the cottage. If they need something looked up for like research or something like that, then the staff will get it for them and print it out and give it to them.
Okay.
So they don't have cell phones, they don't have computers. Again, we've had issues with that at the school, where they've worked through the blocks that we have on the system to get to a dirty website or whatever. So, or try to email friends
See,
or boyfriends.
In school, they had the blocks on it in school, like high school and
Yeah.
middle school, but somebody always knew how to get to it. So.
Yep, and they've done that. So, yep. Any other questions? I know I let you guys ask questions throughout, but any other questions that you
Are
have?
there things? Well, I guess I need to do a tour, a physical tour. It said on that sheet I filled out.
Right.
But I'm trying to think of things. I'm like a project guy. I'm trying to think of something that you could do with them that needs to be done here. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
refinishing old furniture outdoor or something.
Mm-hmm.
Where,
I'll join that. That would be awesome.
where the tools you would bring would be appropriate, or
Right.
you would, you know, obviously wouldn't bring a saw or anything, but something that, you know,
Yeah, we've had our kids help with like art projects on campus, like creating murals or things of that nature. So, I mean, I'm open to that as long as the kids were in a good place and being safe and you had appropriate equipment. I mean, I'm open to that. So,
I just have to see,
mhm.
because it's kind of like killing.
Yeah, and also we have a maintenance department that does most of the work of things on our campus, so we'd have to talk with them first too
Yeah,
about
yeah.
messing with anything structurally. But I mean, like I said, the kids are really creative. They like doing creative things. They're very artsy, many of them. So
I was just thinking in terms of, you know, for me, you asked what I do for a
Right.
company. I like to, you know, we had all this teak furniture, and I just stripped it all down, sanded it all down, and re-oiled it all, and it looks great. And so when you get done something like that, you're like, you know, spend a lot of time, a lot of hard work, but look at the result. And I'm thinking maybe if they can do something that they can learn a skill plus contribute to like the campus. I mean, I would imagine that would be a very positive thing
right.
in
Because
multiple
you could
ways.
always do, okay, like if you had a bench or something, as long as you like had sanded it down and it was just been painting it, could
Mhm.
you do that? Like,
Yeah.
Or you could even sand it, and they won't.
because they, I mean, the little sand things, would that, I mean,
Or
could they
little
use that
sander.
already?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest concern with that would be them trying to pocket it and
Yeah.
use it later. So you have to be like I always tell volunteers, if you're bringing tools,
Take inventory.
inventory. Yep, because they will try to stick it in the pocket.
Examples of things that volunteers have come in and done, like.
Cooking, crocheting, quilting, the gardening project, doing painting, music, like playing guitar, teaching guitar lessons, trying to think, cooking, a lot of cooking.
Now, as far as like sewing and crocheting, how do they, I guess, manage that as far as
The
like,
crochet,
needles and-
yeah, the crochet needles that they have are like very dull. Yeah. And we keep inventory on those because they use those in the cottage a lot for coping skill.
Okay, and now as far as like a needle, if they're sewing,
Yeah, that'd be if you want to depend on which kids you were working with, especially the kids that self-harm a great deal. You probably wouldn't want to give them a needle because that's very easy to pocket and use later.
yeah.
So we'd have to be really choosy on the kid.
So, anyways, I'm just saying, as far as like how you get.
I mean, it's a possibility that a kid could do that. It would just have to be one of our kids that doesn't self-harm, or it
Right.
wouldn't be an issue with safety as far as that goes.
Okay.
Yep.
So that might be the case, like with his stuff. Like,
Right.
As long as they don't have any tendencies to
Right.
find things and self-harm and stuff like that, they could use tools.
Yeah. They'd have to be, we'd have to make sure that those were the ones that were maintaining their safety.
Okay.
Yep.
How does it work with, you know, if one group gets to do something and another group doesn't?
They stay back with another staff because generally in the cottages we'll have enough staff that we can do that, or we'll try to work it out where we can get additional staff in to make that happen.
No, I mean in terms of
Yeah, do they
fairness.
get that?
Oh, no, because they,
I'm sure it'd be like, oh, we got to do this.
well, they know, yeah, and they know what the expectations are. Just like with outings that we plan, if we know that we're going to plan an outing, then we'll let the kids know what the expectations are, and if they don't follow those expectations, they're not going to be eligible for the outing. And then those would stay back behind. So we give them clear direction on why we do things and, you know, how it's happening and why it's a part of someone's treatment and not a part of your treatment. And you'll hear that a lot as well. Someone will be like, well, I didn't get to do that. Well, everybody's treatment's different. Everybody's got a different, you know, goal, and everybody's working for something different. So everybody's going to be,
Physical education here?
I'm sorry?
Do they do physical education here?
Yeah, they have physical education at the school, and then from 3 to 4 every day they have, you know, some free time where they can either go to the gym or play outside, ride bikes. The boys have skateboards. Some of them have scooters, so they do have their outside time.
Okay.
And some of them even do like Just Dance and like some of those other things
And then I
to
know
work
you said
out.
You're really into fitness, so
Yep.
I don't know if maybe you guys had somebody here that kind of.
Yeah, and some of our kids have done yoga before. We had a staff that did yoga with them, and that's something I'm trying to start up again because that staff's currently not able to do that anymore.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
So we try to incorporate all of that. So
Yeah, because do y'all like? Cause I'm a dancer, or I was growing up, And so I don't know, do y'all have like an area, like if somebody was to come and teach like a dance class or teach like a Zumba or like a
Well, our kids are,
yoga or something?
right now, our kid, like we can do yoga, but it has to be trauma focused yoga, which that's what the staff was trained in. So you're not doing like the downward dog and all that, because that can be quite revealing sometimes. It can be taken the wrong way. So they were doing more like, you know, warrior poses or like goddess pose or like, you know, doing progressive relaxation, things like that were more of a powerful stance rather than a like more sexual portray of your body. So, because I'm thinking like happy baby is probably not the best thing with these kids. Right. So, and the dancing thing, we don't encourage dance because dance here turns into
So even like ballet or anything like that, it's
they try to turn everything into something very provocative.
Right.
So even I'm sure if you try to do ballet, they're going to try to turn it into something provocative.
Right.
I'm not going to demonstrate, but
I
they
just meant, you know, there is dance therapy that has been
Right.
used in a lot of situations, but
yeah. I mean, we could do that, but I'm sure that just based on our standards, we'd have to have someone that was trained in
oh,
that
yeah, definitely.
to do that. So.
Yeah, I can see where that would be interesting.
Yeah, because like just dance can sometimes be an issue, but
Yeah.
you know, we try to get them as much physical activity as we can.
And are they allowed to listen to music?
They are. It just has to be very appropriate music. Can't have any curse words. Can't have any like sexual innuendos. So they do have like their iPods or MP3 players, but we put the music on those for them.
So is it usually like Christian-based music? Or?
No, we have some Christian-based. We have like a different variety.
Okay.
So like they can pick like we have them numbered. So they'll say like I want MP3 player 2 today, and it might be R&B music, and MP3 player 4 might be country music. So we have a variety, just making sure it's more appropriate music.
Is there a faith component to any of the treatment?
We certainly allow the kids to practice their own faith. We don't push any sort of religion on them because some of our kids don't have a religion. Others do. We do have a lot of volunteers that come from the church or maybe come in and do like a session with the kids. But I mean, we also, if that kid doesn't want to participate, then we don't force them to. Our boys go to church every Sunday. And they enjoy that. The girls chose not to. They just said that they prefer not to go to church. So, of course, we're not going to force them. It's a client right for them to not want to go. And we have a group that comes to our locked unit on Wednesdays to have a kind of communal, I guess, religious service. So that they have some components of it. And like if a child says they need a coping skill, I might suggest prayer if I know that they have religion in their background. But I think that that's probably the extent of it, just so we don't step on anyone's toes. Because we do have some kids that are very against religion based on their background and their family beliefs. So with these kids, I think I mentioned this before, but they're in treatment from the time they wake up till the time they go to bed. So when you are here, make it a teaching moment. Make the most of your time with these kids to teach them what a healthy relationship is, what healthy boundaries are, what a healthy person looks like in your life that wants to help you and is actually here for you, not just wanting to use you for something. So please just keep that in mind as you're working with these kids, because as I said before, they're great, they're wonderful, but some of them we can help change and help them in their lives to grow and be a better person, but other ones they leave here and we're like, I hope that it clicks one day. I really just hope that I at least planted a seed of hope in this child. So that's what it's all about, is just planting a seed of hope in this child and hopefully planting it so it can grow one day.